it's not
Just like Egypt.
the majority. It's really poor people. They did not enjoy any of the fruits of this booming economy. So now they don't really understand what they have to be sorry for, or they didn't lose anything.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
I do not have the program with them.
They don't have a program. They just
Rebecca,
have a
do you
title.
have the program?
That would be great if we had the program. Yes, I have the program.
I don't, I'm sorry.
No
Sammy,
problem.
do you have a program?
Just my cell phone died, so I cannot check it online.
You found the right one.
In fact, she was waiting for me downstairs. Someone
With both.
With both.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Ksenia Svetlova.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a newly elected Israeli MK, and also Middle Eastern Affairs specialist at Hebrew University. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this session, Arab Spring, ISIS Fall. My name is Maida Shifter. I'm a member of the J Street Finance Committee. I'm looking forward to finding out if fall is a double entendre in this context. At this time, I'd like to ask everybody to turn off or silence your cell phones or other devices so we don't have any interruptions. Toward the end of the session, participants will have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists, and once the moderator has opened the question and answer session, hand your cards. There are cards on the table. Hand the card with the question to a staff member who will come around. Just hold it up and come around and get it. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this. Shadid is a fellow with the Truman National Security Project and co-chair of its Middle East North Africa Working Group. She's also the former director of outreach at the New America Foundation's Middle East Task Force and national political director at the Arab American Institute. She has appeared on the BBC, MSNBC, and Al Jazeera, among others. Now I'd like to turn the discussion over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So first, I'd like to, on behalf of everybody on stage with me, thank J Street for putting together this conference and what I know has been a really important conversation over the last few days. But I'd like to especially thank and have everyone have the opportunity to applaud the J Street staff. And we want to thank Sammy Sinchimer over on the corner who put this panel together. And I've done this before. These people work night and day for weeks in order to put on the event that you've just attended. And they do it not just around the conference time, but every single day. And it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of perseverance. And I'm really very grateful that you guys are here. I also, in my personal capacity, want to give a shout out to whoever is here from J Street U. I love you guys. What you're doing is so important, and it takes so much courage, and it takes so much energy, and you don't have to do it. You're all busy. You're students, and I know that it takes a lot of guts to challenge, what you've been raised with, some of you. And I also know that as an Arab American activist, I love speaking to J Street U students and groups because always, every time I've visited J Street U at any campus, there are Arab and Muslim students who are part of that community. And I think that that's so special and really something you should be very proud of. And as an Arab American, I thank you for creating a space where we can show what it means for us to be working together towards a peaceful resolution. So thank you to the J Street U students in the room. So I know that the past few days we've talked a lot about the recent elections, a lot about what we have in store for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And today, at this moment, we have a chance to kind of zoom the lens out and look a little bit at the region as a whole. And we have four very distinguished panelists here to have that conversation with you. And so I'm going to start off by asking a few questions to the panelists. And please start writing as you hear them speaking. Start writing your questions on the cue cards that you see on your table. And if you raise your hand, someone from J Street will bring them over, and we will start bringing the audience questions into the conversation. So my first question is going to be for Marina Ottaway. Marina is a senior scholar at the Woodrow Wilson Center. She's a longtime analyst of political transformations in Africa, the Balkans, and the Middle East. If you have not been reading what she writes, you must. I always do. She's currently working on a project at the Wilson Center about the countries of the Arab Spring in Iraq. So Marina, my first question to you is, when the Arab Spring started in Tunisia and then Egypt, I think so many of us saw so much opportunity. And in the last maybe year, we've stopped seeing opportunity and we've seen so many threats. And so I want to know if you still see that there is opportunity in the region, even with all of the more recent violence and tumult and counter-revolution in Egypt, and what do you still see that we should be optimistic about?
Well, I think that everybody was very excited about the Arab Spring. You have to remember how little change there had been in that part of the world for such a long time. And I think everybody got carried away with optimism, with the hope that this was really a turning point. In reality, what has happened was predictable, because no large-scale political change, no significant political change has ever gone in a straight line. You have advances, you have changes, and then you have setbacks. And what we are now is very definitely in a period of setback. There is only one country where you can say things are going relatively well, and that is Tunisia, despite this horrific terrorist attack that did not really affect the central character of the politics of the country at this point. And there are still reasons for being fairly optimistic there. I mean, that does not mean that there are no problems, but I think things are still going in the right direction. Everywhere else right now, we are in a period of reflux. In other words, whatever progress appeared to be made has been annulled essentially by more recent events. Perhaps the most difficult part is the fact that in this process of trying to bring about political change, there are two countries that have fallen apart. One is Libya, and the other is Yemen. These are countries where, before we can start talking about a new political system, we have to find ways to put the states have to be put back together. I don't want to be pessimistic, I should have put Syria there. I mean, Libya, Syria, and Yemen. I'm trying to be relatively optimistic and to think that Iraq is still not in that group of countries that have totally disintegrated, but I would argue that it's not very far from that.
Thank you. Well, that was optimistic. Okay. My next question will be for Joseph Bahout, who's a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment in the Middle East program. His research focuses on political events in Lebanon and Syria, where both of our families come from, and regional spillover of the Syrian crisis. And Joseph also recently came back from Kurdistan, so I want to make sure that he has a few minutes to talk to you all about what he learned and experienced while he was there. But first, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what I think we can agree was the fundamental reason behind all of these protests that started was a fundamental breakdown of the relationship between citizen and state everywhere in the Arab world. And I just want to kind of get your feedback on what you see as how the original kind of nonviolent protest in Syria, how that has evolved, and what we can do to start actually repairing that relationship. Because I would say even in countries like Egypt, where there is not overt violence, that relationship still hasn't even begun to be repaired.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also very happy to be here. It's for me very important, and I mean symbolically to be at Jade Street. I would answer your question. In fact, you raised 2 or 3 questions, so I'll try to answer one of them or 2, and also answer the question that you asked Marina about. I would say that despite all the horrendous landscape that we have in front of us today, which is mainly embodied by the extreme savagery and brutality of ISIS and also of its nemesis, the Assad regime in Syria and other regimes in the region. I think that if we take really an analytical point of view, I think we have some reasons to be also optimistic, and I would agree with Marina on that. Let me say that if you put it in a historical framework, this Arab Spring, let's say, phenomenon is something that is long, very long, and I think we are still at the beginning of it. It is a bumpy process, like all the revolutions, like Europe in the 1840s and 40s and etc. And it's specifically also a non-linear process. So we will have advances and recesses. We will have advances and setbacks. Egypt is maybe today in a setback. Syria is definitely a huge setback or a huge failure. Tunisia is maybe a relative success story. The question for us, I think, political observers and analysts, is to ask why does it work somewhere and does it, I mean, it's not completely working somewhere else. I think we have several parameters and several factors that we have to single out. The first one is the nature of society. The nature of the fabric of society, how tribal it is, how communitarian it is, and you have a spectrum of differences from Tunisia to the Mashriq countries, Iraq, you mentioned Kurdistan, Syria, and etc. The second thing is the nature of the political structure, the nature of the political power. Of course, all of these systems were dictatorship or autocratic system or authoritarian systems. However, we have fundamental differences between countries like Syria, where the authoritarian system is held by a very small cluster, a clique of person, a family even, or a system like in Egypt or in Tunis, where in fact you have, even if it is anemic, a kind of rule of law or a state that is functioning. And the third factor, which is very important, I think, is the relation between the armed forces, the security apparatus, and this social and political fabric. If Syria is today in the situation in which it is in fact because all of these parameters were in the red, in a very dire situation. You have a very heterogeneous society with a lot of fractures between communities and etc. You have a regional environment which is very tensed and volatile that adds to that. You have a political structure that has been for 40 years built around not even a sect, but a family and a clan and etc. And you have an armed force apparatus which has been constructed completely by Hafiz al-Assad and then by Bashar al-Assad as a Praetorian Guard in charge of protecting the interests of the mafia and the clique. This is why, for example, what happened in Syria couldn't have happened in Tunisia or in Egypt, and I think Marina could say much more. A second set of remarks has to do with this, the question you asked about how long will it take to patch up all this. I think what characterizes the period we are living in the Middle East is something that also resembles Europe in the 1840s, in the sense that, and you have a very beautiful sentence by Gramsci that characterizes that, when he says an old world has died, but a new world is still unborn. And in this interregnum, he says, you have monsters appearing. And I think that, I mean, nothing is more monstrous than what we are seeing today in Syria, ISIS versus this regime. Both are as monstrous as the others. And I think that probably the destruction of one takes the destructions of the other. But in this interregnum, I think, we have to learn how to, first of all, damage control things, because this situation is going to last. And second, not lose hope and try to see what are the seeds of the reconstruction of what you mentioned. And what you mentioned, i.e. this fracture between societies and state, also in political science, we knew about it before, and Marina was right, that this was predictable in a way. We all know that the Arab state system has one flow at least, which was really a deep flow at least, which was the legitimacy flow, i.e. this question of acceptance by the ruled of the ruler. And I think that this is what is today at stake in the region. I'm optimistic because something is definitely buried behind us, this Arab state system of authoritarianism, the Mukhabarat state, and etc. Yes, sure, we are living a miasma, a kind of limbo period with monsters moving in this limbo. However, I think that civil societies in the Arab world are at last awakened and probably taken their destiny into their hands. The process is, of course, a bloody one, unfortunately, but history is often bloody.
Thank you. My next question will be for Ambassador Francois Rivassou, who is the Deputy Head of the European Delegation to the United States. The ambassador has spent his career working on disarmament, security, and multilateral affairs, and also served as the head of the NATO desk in Strategic Affairs and Disarmament Department at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So what I'd like to ask is, do you feel that Europe has a different relationship with the countries in the Middle East as a former colonial power in that region? Do you feel that there are tools that Europe has to play a positive role in the region that are different from those that the United States can employ?
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to G Street. It's a great privilege to be with you, and I greatly appreciate. And thank you to all who have organized that. I know what it is. Your question is interesting, but first of all, I don't think we should explain everything by what happens now more than 60 years ago. It's true that we have some knowledge of the Arab world, not the entire Arab world, by the way, because we have my country is France. We know probably better the Maghreb than the Mashrek. We know a bit Syria, 25 years there, a bit Lebanon, 25 years there, but 25 years, it's not very much to know a country, I would say that the main point for us today is that, like Israel, we think we are in the first line. We think we are in the first line because it's in our countries that foreign fighters are from our countries, and foreign fighters are going to the various places in the Middle East. It's in our countries that the pressure between communities, the pressure of our freedom of expression, of our civilization is the highest, and the capability of living together as we hope to be able to do, and along the principles we have been developing since 2 centuries. It takes, as the previous speaker said, a long time to build up a democratic society, particularly when you start in Europe of a society with a lot of legacy from the past. That's a bit different from the US. So, that's our first reaction. We are on the first line. There are times where knowing well the country could help. For example, in Mali, we knew the geography, we knew the people, we could speak their language. It's very important when you meet people to Malians speak French. It's not the same than when you are in Afghanistan speaking Daru or Urdu. So I think this is maybe there are elements for us. We also are receiving much more, not enough, many would argue, but much more refugees than any other western part of the world. We have a country like Bulgaria, like Cyprus, and today this terrible situation in the Mediterranean between Libya, Italy, Malta, Spain, where you see all these immigrants who are so martyrized by the people who try to carry them, and they drown, and they are abused, and they are stolen, and they arrive sometimes, or sometimes they don't arrive, but they arrive because they cannot stay. And this is a consequence partly of the conflicts created by Daesh, and more. So for us, ISIL indeed is really a first-size challenge. And when you discuss with Europeans, yes, we have a crisis in Ukraine, but for the majority of Europeans, the challenge posed by Daesh is seen as a present and immediate danger of first category.
Thank you. So I'm happy to update the bio of our last speaker. It says here that Ksenia Svetlova is a Knesset candidate, but she is now a member-elect of the Knesset. So mazel tov. For 13 years, she served as the Arab Affairs correspondent and analyst on Middle Eastern affairs for the Russian-language Channel 9 in Israel. And she's also fluent in Arabic. And I think that she is certainly the first Israeli politician and one of the first Israelis I've ever met who's had the opportunity to travel throughout the Middle East, not in a military uniform. And so I think that there's a really unique perspective that Ksenia is going to be able to bring to her leadership in the Knesset. And I'd just like to have you talk a little bit about what you see, how you see that as an opportunity, and what you saw in terms of the election rhetoric about the region and maybe threats or opportunities for Israel when it comes to their relationship with their neighbors.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's very good to be here. I'm enjoying all the sessions and really the amazing energies in all of the sessions, the plenaries, the meetings, and thank you for this. It's an amazing opportunity. As for your question, well, I think that the most valued thing that I got from my journeys in the Middle East, first of all, it's the understanding how much we lose, but not enjoying the Middle Eastern culture, the Arabic culture. Unfortunately, in Israel, there is now a battle about the status of Arabic language. Could we imagine this, that it will be happening even some 20, 15 years ago, 10 years ago? So by now, our government wants to remove the Arabic language from the two official languages in Israel. Yes, this is just an indication of how much we want to know, and how little we know, and how little we want to know about countries that surround us. Being there and enjoying the amazing cities that I visited, I can say to you that it's my dream that my daughters, along with all the children in Israel, would be able to enjoy the mosques of Cairo, the Leptis Magna in Libya, the shores of Beirut and Junia, and you know what? If that's not possible, then at least the coffee shops in Ramallah, because that's a decent neighbor, being a neighbor one to another. I can tell you from knowing facts on the ground, no one can ever be able to tell me some truisms or some myths or sell me some lies for a real deal. For example, being on Tahrir Square in the beginning of the uprisal, I've been there by, I think it was 29th of January of 2011. I can tell you that people that I interviewed, and I think I interviewed hundreds, were talking to me about everything possible, but not about Israel. Not one of them started the conversation or even mentioned Israel during all of these extensive interviews that I handled. So one of the first things that came to my mind, it's not all about Israel. Wonder, because we think that the world is around us, basically, but it seems that our neighbors have other problems and other grievances, except for just, dealing with us and with the Palestinians. I can tell you that knowing facts on the ground, I can tell you how serious our situation is. And I'm going to press this issue in the Knesset, because I know for a fact that a two-state solution is slipping through our fingers. We are losing it. I know how the Palestinian cities look like, how the access roads look like, and how do they already, by now, there are secluded villages. They are in the rings of the settlements, or some neighborhoods, Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. And when you look at the map already now, it reminds you mostly of the Swiss cheese, with its great holes. And you don't really know what to do with it. You don't really have the answers, not to the Palestinians that you talk to, and not also to the Israelis that live in these neighborhoods or the settlements, because right now we are handling with a very tough reality. I've been traveling until now, almost daily in Ramallah and Nablus and Jenin, and on my way I always noticed there are another two caravans, another two caravans, another road being built by the military for the settlers, for the hilltops, the small ones, not for the big ones. So I know that we are almost there, and it scares me as hell to know that we can lose it, and then we will have to just deal with the reality of the one state, apartheid state. I don't know what it will be. Frankly, the Likud party, not in one panel that I participated during the elections, they never told, if not the two-state solution, then what? Because, of course, they don't want the one state with the equal rights for everybody as well. Yes, but they just not ready to admit that what they are meaning to have, it's the small Bantustans around Ramallah perhaps. There was another one around Tubas. And then what? Then what after that? So knowing this, I know that we have to fight very hard right now. It will be a real battle for the sake of the possibility to implement the two-state solution at some point. I can tell you also that also the very important lesson that I learned from being active journalist and traveling all around the region, and I can tell it to Israelis and I can tell it to the Arabs as well, in any place. You cannot control violence. If you think that you can implement violence in some controlled way to one faction or another faction in this part of the country, but not in that one part of the country, then at some point you're going to lose the control. It happened with Arafat during the Intifada. It's happening with us in Israel in every military operation that we have. And eventually it will bring us to another bloodshed on the level of what we witnessed in 2000 during the second Intifada. And this is a very scary reality. So to people who tell me that we can maintain the status quo, to maintain the status quo is also to control the violence, to try to control the violence, to have a doses of this violence when you think that it's appropriate. No, you cannot do this. And you cannot maintain the status quo either. It's already absent, the status quo. What we have now is the crumbling of this scheme that was active for some years, but now not any longer. Again, I would not be sitting here with you. Perhaps I will be on a mission right now in Cairo or in some other city. As a journalist, I would not be joining politics if I would not be thinking that now it's really urgent. Now it's about every single day that goes by. I think now that the new government of Netanyahu will do everything in its power to shaken the situation even further. Because then it will be very convenient to blame again the Palestinians for being violent, for being uncontrolled, for being non-partners. And it can happen any day. I can tell you that East Jerusalem is exactly the place where it will erupt. I don't want to play the role of Cassandra, but unfortunately, most of the time I do, because I see that right now we have President Abbas doing excellent job in the West Bank, and I've been looking at what he's been doing during the protective edge, for example, yes, going after the militants of Hamas, handing the information about those very people who kidnapped our youth, the 3 young boys next to Hebron, and the security cooperation was wonderful. So I can tell you that they, at my point of view, they fulfilled their commitment from their roadmap. We have not. I can tell you that the violence right now is rampant in East Jerusalem. And I'll tell you why. Because East Jerusalem is the place which is not controlled by the Palestinian security forces. Neither is controlled by Israeli security forces. It's a no man's land. This is why all the tension is building up there. And it's the capital of Israel right now. We are talking about the place, which is Siloam. It's 2 minutes exactly from the Temple Mount, from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So we are talking about the heart, the very heart of Israel, where we, having this, we're watching it every day. We're having another intifada on the way, unless something good will happen on the way and stop it. A lot of optimism here, so I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I've gotten many excellent questions from the audience, many of them from my J Street U students. What I'm going to do is I'm going to direct the questions to each one, to one speaker, and then if any of the other speakers have something they'd like to add, they should feel free to do so. So first to Marina. Marina, can you talk a little bit about not just the threat of ISIS or Daesh in terms of the territory that they control, but as a network? Particularly, what does it mean for countries like Jordan that have been relatively calm during the Arab Spring? And how do you explain the success of Daesh in spreading from one state to the other?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think this is a very good question, because we tend to focus, I think, too much on Daesh as an entity that controls territory. I'm not saying that it is irrelevant, the fact that they have occupied almost 1/3 of Iraq, that they control large part of Syria. But I think Daesh as a territorial entity, it's going to be defeated, and probably sooner rather than later. I think they're somewhat overextended in terms of how much territory they control. And I think they have been so successful originally, particularly in Iraq, because the Iraqi army simply did not fight. It laid down arms. What we are beginning to see now, that there is a reaction, that the Kurds are fighting, that the Shia militias are fighting, which have problems that leads to other kind of problems. But I think you can already see that that Daesh is slowly losing territory. And losing territory probably could have an impact also on their capacity to recruit people. It will certainly have an impact on their capacity to finance themselves. They have lost some of the oil wells in Iraq, for example, and that certainly is a setback. But as the organization as the organization loses some battles, it's going to start losing this aura of invincibility that it developed in the summer of 2014 when it was just rolling across Iraq. Unfortunately, even if ISIS suffers territorial setback, there is the aspect of ISIS which to me is the most dangerous, that is the network of terrorist groups that exist. ISIS is becoming a new Al-Qaeda in that sense. There is ISIS in Syria and Iraq, but there are also all these organizations around the region that are pledging their allegiance to ISIS, so that you now have not only you have the Islamic State, but you also have the Sinai province of the Islamic State, because one organization, Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, did declare allegiance to ISIS. You have other groups that, you have various organizations in Libya that have pledged their allegiance, Boko Haram in Nigeria, and so on and so forth. Now, the problem here is that these networks continue changing. They change from one thing to another. In many ways, the new ISIS networks are replacing what used to be the Al-Qaeda network. And in fact, there were some defections, for example, from Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb to ISIS at this point. And these networks are very, very difficult to defeat. It's not one battle. Sure, security services can track them down and so on. They can, but if they are attacked, then they change into something else, and that is where the real problem is.
To the ambassador, there's often conversation in Washington about if there was a nonviolent solution, a two-state solution to the conflict, that this would greatly deter radicalism within the Arab world, radicalization of Muslim communities in Europe. And there are others that say that it's wrong to make that linkage. And so there's a question here that asks how much and how do you think that ending the conflict would help the US and Europe achieve other goals for positive change in the region?
We know that would we able to have peace and would the dreams of Xenia be able to realize, we would have solved part of the problem. But I would not make a formal linkage because, you know, ISIS, we have still to agree on a full understanding of the Arab Spring and its implications, not only because it has given way to various situations, ranging from Tunisia to Syria, Libya, Egypt, etc., but because we don't know exactly yet what this notion of ISIS fall that you have put in the title means. Is the rise of this violent extremism an extension of the Arab Spring? Is it a reaction, as we could believe when we go on Tahrir Place, a reaction to the aspirations of many citizens? Personally, I'm tempted to say that it's probably a trend which is much broader and much older than that. But the Arab Spring had allowed this trend to emerge in the full light. it's a religious thing, Daesh. Before the panel, I was discussing with Marina. It's something which you cannot understand fully if you just think that it's a consequence of the Arab Spring. Daesh has very old religious roots, and it's probably also a reaction to globalization, a kind of reaction. There's so many reactions to globalization, from the positive to the negative. It's probably one form of reaction to globalization. People want to reaffirm their identity in a world with much more constraints, political, awful, economical, also terrible. The religion is something always to catch up to. So in my view, if we want really to solve the problem, we have also to address its cultural dimension, its philosophical dimension, its religious dimension. Daesh are takfiri. Their first target is other Muslims, you know. So this gives us already part of the answer.
If I may just add on this, I fully agree with the Ambassador. I believe that for now, at least, our conflict with the Palestinians is a territorial one. And it's very good that is this way. I think that is going to the very bad direction. And it gets already the religious dimensions, which will be very threatening, I think, for us who believe that we can resolve this conflict. As for what is happening right now in the Arab world, well, the clash is not so much between the civilizations, within the Islam itself. The struggle between the Shia and the Sunni is as old as Islam itself. And of course, the Wahhabi Islam, which is also back to 18th century, well, you know, has nothing to do with Israel, the Palestinians, the two-state solution, and so on. So we can solve something for ourselves here on our little place, which is called Israel and Palestine, and make our lives slightly better. It doesn't say that we are able to, or can we, solve such a grave problem such as Islamic fundamentalism.
So my next question is going to be for Joseph, and you can tack on whatever you want to say in there. So we have a lot of questions about Syria. Mm-hmm. I'm going to kind of raise some of the common threads and then ask for your response. So the first is many questions about the U.S. reaction, and has it been a smart thing to finally decide to arm and train rebel groups? Is it too little, too late? Is it smart to just be attacking ISIS and kind of leaving the Assad regime in its place? We have one question asking, is Israel covertly supporting Assad to preserve the status quo? What would cause the conflict to spill over into Israel and Lebanon? And the final one, which to me is kind of the most poignant, is what can we do when we're going to have millions of children, a generation of Syrians who have been traumatized by this conflict? How will we build them back into a functioning society?
Okay, this is very convenient, in fact, because I wanted to react on the ISIS issue, and I'll try to tie it to your question about Syria, which is, I think, very important. My take, and I think no one would disagree, really, that Syria is, besides the fact that it's probably one of the worst nightmares in terms of humanitarian issue and ordeal and political labyrinth, unsolvable for now 4 years. I think it's also the generator for more than a decade to come of very deep disruptions in the functioning of the state, of the regional order. You talked about these children and the population that is left without education, without etc. We are seeing only the humanitarian level of this ordeal, but it has also probably a potential political, societal, and strategic importance and impact for the future. Let me give you one example, for instance, okay, one illustration. Lebanon, which is the country where I'm born into, and I've lived there for more than 30 years, is a country of 3.5 million people. Okay, and today we have in Lebanon, and you know it, Rebecca, because you're also Lebanese by birth, we have 1.5 million Syrian refugees, meaning that you have 1/3 of the population in Lebanon, which is Syrian. If you assume that 1/3 of these people will remain in Lebanon, probably, because all all specialists of exile and displacement know that 1/3 of populations remain where they are, meaning that you are disrupting very deeply the political, sectarian, etc. equilibrium in Lebanon. And you can go on and on these examples. You can talk about Jordan, about Turkey, etc. Now, how to do with that? The question of US and Western, let's say, posture towards Syria is important. The question of how we apprehend issues like ISIS and other horrific phenomena is important. And also, I think, and here I would echo what Xenia, if you allow me to call you this way, said. I mean, you have other issues than the Arab-Israeli question that are also weighing on this region. And not the least of these questions is what we tend to call the Sunni-Shia debate or the Sunni-Shia fight, which is today also a Sunni-Sunni fight, but also the rise of Iran as a political and strategic, I'm sorry to say it so, but hegemon in the region, and how would the regional players react to that in the decades to come? So all these questions, I think, weigh on the way we are, in fact, tackling ISIS. A few words on ISIS. I would like to say a few words. I would agree with Marina that ISIS as a terror network is probably something which is today being rolled back. And we will probably more or less destroy ISIS in Iraq, contain it in Syria. But this is not the end of the story. It's not even the story, because ISIS as a metaphor, forget ISIS as a phenomenon. ISIS as a metaphor is in fact one of the byproducts. If you kill ISIS, you will have an ISIS prime or ISIS point 2 or etc. in a few years. ISIS is a byproduct of a sedimentation, of an accumulation of things that are unsolved in this region, not since the beginning of the Arab Spring, but since the beginning of the 50s and the 60s. Bad governance, lack of legitimacy, authoritarian system, lack of growth. You said it, bad relations between societies and states and etc. This is one level. The second level is that ISIS is also the result of an all-out military answer to, let us say, security concerns in the region without any political component. We have dismantled an authoritarian regime in Iraq. It was maybe something good at one point, but we haven't done anything to replace it by a functional political system. Today, the way we are approaching Syria is by looking only at ISIS as a terrorist phenomenon and not addressing what has given rise to these phenomena in countries like Syria, in countries like Libya, and etc., forgetting about the political, let us say, aspect of things, the need of these populations to reconstruct a proper functional system of governance will also give rise to probably a new type and a probably more savage type of ISIS. So the question of should we leave Assad aside and address ISIS, should we address Assad and ISIS together and etc. is important, but I think that we have to address this question by really getting to the root of the problem. My take, and I would maybe be marginal in this audience, my take is that so far, unfortunately, the Obama administration and this present, this actual American administration has been much below what was expected to deal with that issue, at least because it is over-obsessed probably with the actors that I have mentioned before, i.e. reaching a kind of deal with Iran. It is good to try to find a way of accommodation to the Iranian nuclear problem. However, the Iranian nuclear aspect is only one aspect of Iran's quest to power in the region. At the same time where we are negotiating and probably approaching a deal with Iran, in the 6 last months, Iran has put complete grip on countries like Yemen, like Iraq, and Qasem Soleimani yesterday was having a very nice statement saying that Iraq is today the country calling the shot completely in Iraq and in Lebanon. And the advisor of President Rouhani last week was saying that Iran is today controlling 85% of Syria. So fine, it is nice to agree on the nuclear issue, but if in the meantime Iran is behaving the way it is behaving, I think that ISIS is not only not going to be rolled back, but is probably having a very prosperous future in the times to come, maybe under a different name, I don't know.
Yes, I just wanted to add something on on this question. One of the questions talked about the U.S. arming and training the Syrian opposition, the Syrian moderate opposition. We are not. We are talking about arming and training them. We have not done anything. I mean, a press briefing given by Admiral Kirby, who is the spokesman for the Pentagon, just a few days ago, admitted that the United States has now identified something like 2,000 people that will have to be vetted to decide whether some of them can be trained. In other words, the crisis with the United States declared that it was going to do something back in the last summer. And here we are after all this time, and we are just at the beginning of the possible process of vetting people. So I think it's important to understand in this situation how little the United States controls in the situation, how minor a player it has become. And I think this is this is when we talk about what the United States should do and what it should take into consideration. The big players, the United States is not one of the big players. I totally agree the biggest player right now is Iran. Iran has real influence in the region. And when we talk about, oh, well, it's a bad thing, again, these are statements from administration officials, that these Shia militias that are supported by Iran are participating in the battle for Tikrit, to get Tikrit, which is in Sunni territory, out of the hands of ISIS. They are not in a position to decide whether they go in or not. They are, the United States really does not have much of an influence there. Yes, we are bombing position of ISIS, and that is very much welcomed by the Peshmerga. It's even welcomed by the Shia militia. It's welcomed by anybody who is fighting on the ground. But the fact that we are bombing ISIS position does not mean that we have an influence at this point. And unfortunately, that's something that we have to take into consideration when we look at what's happening.
So a question now for Ksenia also about ISIS. And our participants want to know if you think that the strength of ISIS in the region how do you think it affects the possibility of a two-state solution? And also, in the past election, the Prime Minister often conflated the different threats in the region as one. And so a quote before the day before the election, in an interview with NRG, he said, "Whoever moves to establish a Palestinian state or intends to withdraw from territory is simply yielding territory for radical Islamic terrorist attacks against Israel." Pressed to say if this meant he would ever agree to a Palestinian state, he answered that he would never agree to a Palestinian state. He answered, "Indeed."
I think that the greatest obstacle now to the creation of the independent Palestinian state is Netanyahu himself, and not ISIS, and not Iran, and not any regional player, be important as he might be. I think that using the comparisons, by the way, it was not invented by Netanyahu, comparing his nemesis to Hamas, to ISIS, to the worst terrorists in the world. He did not invent it. It was implemented many times by many political actors before, and I can tell you that from my experience in Gaza Strip, when Fatah wanted to assault Hamas badly, they were shouting to them, "Shia, you are Shia." Okay, so yeah, being the Shia, that's the biggest demon that you can imagine. It works for people. Yes, you demonize the other in this way or the other, and it doesn't matter what term you use. So ISIS is fashionable now. We had now in the latest Purim parties, some of the employees of the foreign ministry were dressing as ISIS. Okay, at the Purim. So they can, and Netanyahu cannot. So okay. So for this, I don't think that for now at least, it has really direct influence on our negotiations, not existent negotiations with the Palestinians, not will it ever, because for now, if we can build on our experience with Al-Qaeda never listed Israel as its first priority. The Arab regimes, definitely. The other Islamist groups, like Muslim Brotherhood, yes. The West at large, United States, all of that come before Israel. So I'm not saying that Islamic State, given the opportunity, will not hurt Israeli or Jewish interest. It certainly will, and we saw already the Hyper Kasher attack in Paris. However, right now it's neither at the magnitude nor it's on our borders. Physically, yes, so we can talk about the direct influence on our lives. I think we have much graver danger right now than having rockets again from Gaza Strip. And I think since the outcome of the protective edge was basically zero, we did not achieve anything except for distracting the infrastructure in Gaza Strip. And certainly they refilled already the rockets that they used. And I think that in the coming next few months, even a year maybe, we will handle with it again. So this is something that Netanyahu prefers not to speak about because it's much more convenient and it's much more hip to talk about such threats as ISIS. If I can add another sentence or two about the opportunities that are being presented to us by the Arab Spring and by what is happening right now in the region, the outcome of this phenomena. First of all, I have to mention Egypt, because many Israeli specialists, and perhaps you are aware of what they've written and published during the January and February of 2011, were absolutely sure that Camp David Accords are doomed, that it will be over in a very few weeks, that the new Egyptian government will just dismantle them and will disregard them and bury them for life. It didn't happen even during the Islamist Mohammed Morsi. There are dynamics of things, and sometimes it's much stronger than what we tend to think. So this is the first one. Second one is Kurds. We have to talk about Kurds. I think that most of us have never been to conferences that were dedicated to the creation of the independent state of Kurdistan or Kurdish autonomy. And I think that's opportunity for us, for Israel, for you in the United States, to really raise this issue and talk about it, maybe for the first time, seriously, like we never talked about it before. So right now we saw a lot of cases of genocide against Kurdish population in Iraq and also in Syria. There are some very serious players that right now they need our help, military and political help, and most of anything they need for us to reevaluate our whole attitude to this very important issue.
So Joseph, we'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your experience in Kurdistan and also what you see as the threat of Syria, the violence in Syria spilling over into Lebanon and into Israel.
Yeah, this was the question I didn't answer before, the attitude of Israel towards what's happening in Syria. It's in direct prolongation of what you said. To put it very briefly, let me say that I think the Israeli posture towards Syria has gone through three very sharp phases. The first one, yes, it was implied in the question, probably the Israeli establishment was having the view that Assad would be the lesser evil, and you had it written in the press. It was you had op-eds every day saying that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, and etc. So I think the system was accommodating to the idea that Assad would ultimately crush the rebellion, survive, and go on in the same kind of modus vivendi with Israel for decades. The second phase came when everybody acknowledged that this is a war of attrition and it's not going to end soon. And you have a country where today Sunni jihadis are fighting Shia jihadis, i.e. Hezbollah and Iran and the Pasdaran are there. ISIS, Nusra, Al-Qaeda and all shades of Sunni fighters are there. So the cynical view of the second phase in Israel was that, okay, these people are all bad guys for us, and they are. Let them kill each other and we count the dead and we are sitting on the fence and looking at things. However, the third phase, I think, is today in the beginning. I think I'm not wrong to say that since, in fact, something important is happening on the southern front of Syria, i.e. the rebellion and the Iranian and Hezbollah are becoming the main fighters on the southern front, i.e. on the border with Israel in places like Dar'a, Suwaida, Quneitra, and etc., I think that the Israeli approach to Syria is beginning to change. A lot of things are signaling this change. First and foremost, the famous raid that occurred a few weeks ago against Quneitra that killed an Iranian general and a very top-ranking Hezbollah member signaled that Israel will not accept that the border becomes a kind of permanent foothold or a fortress to wage potential attacks on Israel. What will Israel do after that or beyond that is still unknown, but my take, and I think Zenia would agree, is that Israel will try to probably create a new, let's say, fait accompli on the border for it not to, let's say, spill over on Israel. But from there on, there are also serious policy options that have to be thought about in Israel. If we agree, and I think that this is something beyond discussion today, that in all cases, in the better of the words, Assad will never be able to regain control of whole Syria. Maybe he can sustain himself in the Alawi mountain, in the Alawi region or in Damascus, but Assad will never be able to become again the devil we knew. So you have to live as Israelis with a new political space in Syria, a new political, let us say, landscape in Syria. And here the choice is between having a permanently failed state, a kind of Somalia on your borders, even if Assad stays in power, bled and diminished, or we try to join the international effort, which is Geneva II and etc., to try to find a political solution for a conflict, given the fact that, of course, this political solution has to really witness a structural change in the governance of Syria and more inclusion for the people who revolted in the first place. So this is as far as the Israeli-Syria question is concerned. If you give me 2 minutes to give my let's say, impressions from Kurdistan. And here also I agree with Xenia. When you go to Kurdistan, I was in Sulaymaniyah for a week. Frankly, it's fascinating to see the birth and the rise of a nation, with all the pitfalls, with all the difficulties, with all the challenges, and etc. But for me, as a political analyst of that region, and also of an Arab, let's say, origin, the two lessons that I found very fascinating for me, and I think they have a reverberation on the Israeli political culture and the Israeli political debate, is one, how you reconcile local identities with national unity. I think this is something you are going to confront at one point or another. We are confronting it in many Arab countries. So how to be Kurdish and Iraqi at the same time, and on all levels, identity politics, distribution of wealth, taxation, military issues. So from the concrete to the symbolic, you have this question. And the second question, which is very much also weighing on Iraq, on Syria, on Lebanon, on Israel, and etc., is how to build a nation, keeping it democratic like the Kurdish society would like it to be, in a very volatile and very dangerous environment, with Iran being the strong actor at the door, with Turkey having also some appetite on your other door, and the Gulf states having other kinds of appetites on a third door, and with a volcano like Syria burning and etc. So how do you keep democracy alive in a very dangerous and very volatile and very, let's say, militarized environment? I think these two questions are important questions for the region at large, and for Israel, I think, also to contemplate and probably to try to drive some conclusions from.
Thank you, and that's a good segue to a question for the ambassador about Turkey. Turkey's role in Syria, in stabilizing that conflict. You know, a lot of the foreign fighters that come from Europe come through Turkey. Turkey has a huge role to play in the emergence or not of an independent Kurdish state. There's been, particularly in the last year or two, a real kind of retreat into a much more authoritarian government from President Erdogan. And so from the EU perspective, what do you see as a role that Turkey should and can be playing?
No question, Turkey is an important actor in the region. Turkey continues to be candidate to joining the European Union, as you know, and the evolution of Turkey, it's up to the Turks to decide, but they have made some very important decisions in the 10 last years to show some of the directions they wanted to go to. Today, maybe I will be a bit marginal on that. What interests Europeans mostly from Turkey may not be Syria, but the position of Turkey in Libya. Because for us, Libya is the crisis of the day, even if obviously it is not as serious in terms of death of human rights than Syria, but its destabilizing potential for us is enormous. You know that it's in Libya that all of the fighters ranging from Mauritania to Iraq are going to take leave, form themselves, reorganize themselves, and go away then to the various theaters. So for us Europeans, Libya is a main problem, and Turkey's attitude in Libya has been very specific and very at odds again with Egypt. So, you know, maybe in Syria also we see that a bit less, but basically the problem is that we have a number of friends in the region, and I'm not even speaking about Israel because yes, but apart from Israel, you have Turkey, who is an ally, you have Egypt, who is a classic friend of us also, and we would like to be able to find out a common approach which would be acceptable to Turkey and to others. The problem is with Turkey today that we are not always sure that Turkey is, we don't know always if Turkey wishes that. And my own take is that Turkey doesn't wish that always. So as Europeans, we are very happy continuing to work with Turkey in trying to improve internal conditions in Turkey. We are not always successful, but at least at economical level, the Turkish government still recognizes entirely that the modernization of Turkey has been made possible through the process of negotiation with the European Union. So we continue. And for the rest, we respect the sovereignty of Turkey, but we find it sometimes, we are not the only one, not always easy to find common ground on some of the crises of the region.
So we are running out of time. I'm going to ask one final question to Marina, and while she's answering, I'm going to give the other panelists an opportunity to think of something genuinely optimistic and positive that we can say about the region so that we can end this on a happy note. And just remind all of you who have tickets to the gala that it will start at 6:30 on the 3rd floor. And I just really want to thank you again for having us here and taking part in such an important and interesting discussion. So, Marina, there are a lot of questions here asking about the role of civil society in building some of the institutions and structures that will be required for democratic and peaceful countries in the region going forward. And I know that your work in Egypt has also focused on the role of the business community. And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about that and also about your impressions on the popularity of President Sisi, because I know from a U.S. perspective, we saw that 99% vote that we thought, was gone in an Egyptian election. And so you had some interesting things to say about that I think others would find interesting as well.
Okay. First of all, concerning civil society, I mean, the basic answer is yes, there is not going to be there are not going to be democratic transitions without the participation of civil society. I mean, civil society is the citizens organized in various forms, and you cannot have a democratic system unless citizens are participating in more than just casting a vote every 4 years, 5 years, whatever the constitution of that country says. In some countries, and here is one of the reasons for optimism in Tunisia, and you see I put in my optimistic thing, there is a strong civil society. For example, there were very interesting organizations, particularly youth groups, that organized themselves for election observation in Tunisia in these last elections. They are very, very active in a lot of different forms. The reason for that is also that the government allows some space for civil society organization. In other words, people can organize, people can be active without taking their lives in their hands every time they do it. The problem with a lot of the Arab countries at this point is that there is no space for civil society. In other words, to do something as a citizen, you have to be heroic. You have to take life in your own hands. The Egyptian government has just passed a new law on NGO that requires all organizations to register, and only the ones that do what the government wants, essentially, I mean, I'm putting it very succinctly, are allowed to register. So that the civil society organizations are being wiped out. There are a small number of them that are struggling to continue existing. They don't have, many of them are not registered because the government would not allow them to register, which means that they are extremely vulnerable because their leaders can be arrested at any time and so on. So civil society is important, but you know, there are two concepts of civil society. One is civil society as citizens rising up in arms against the government, essentially. It's a civil society as the revolutionaries. And the other is civil society as the well-organized NGOs and so on. And there is no space for those in most Arab countries now. There are a few, some countries in the Maghreb allow space for civil society. Morocco, which is not the most democratic country around, but you can have civil society organization. Tunisia, you can have civil society organization. Elsewhere, the participation by citizens means participation in non-legal organizations, essentially, some of which do good things and some of which are doing very bad things. And so that's the situation.
You couldn't stay optimistic.
You have to try.
That's okay. So I'm going to ask Joseph and the ambassador, and when you have a female moderator, what happens is the woman gets the last word. So we'll end with Ksenia's optimism.
I'll try to be very brief. In fact, it's very difficult for me usually to be optimistic, but I would say that if we don't want to sell ourselves, fictions and etc., that the short term and the mid term in the region is bleak. Okay, let's not fool ourselves. But the long term, I think, is promising, and I would say why. Not because I want to end on a cheerful note, but I would say that what's happening and what we have seen happening since 4 or 5 years is, frankly, I think, the deep shaking of something that was very deeply entrenched in the region, and that was problematic. I mean, if you take all the reports of the European Union, the UNDP, the world agencies, and etc., until the 2000s, we were lamenting the apathy of Arab societies, the absence of civil societies, this kind of permanent and probably definitive accommodation with dictatorship, and some people were even giving it some culturalist explanations. Today, people have shown in the Arab world that they are like any other people in the world. They use social media, they know how to go to the street, they know how to topple a government. Probably they don't know how to run elections and to win them. Egypt is a case, Tunisia is another interesting case, and etc. But I think that something has been shaken, and on that level, I am optimistic in the long run. I would say one final word, being in an assembly like this one. I fully understand the security reflex of a country and a society like Israel's. I have often discussed with my Israeli friends and colleagues, and they tell me, in these kinds of situations in the region, we call it in Israel bunker time. It's bunker time. We really retrench, protect ourselves, and wait for the storm to pass. I think that if we all want to have one chance over 100 to have a Middle East for all of us, where in 10, 15 years we can live more or less normally and peacefully, it is time of course, to beware for our security, each one of us, but also to be a little bit more daring and a little bit more audacious towards what's happening around Israel, and to completely, I mean, to understand that what is happening is also a historical process and a historical phenomenon, and in this historical phenomenon, there are many opportunities to seize and to really accompany and encourage. So I would really urge the Israeli friends to be at the same time cautious and security oriented, but at the same time not to miss the historical moment that is opening in front of us in the Arab region. Thank you.
We are continuing to believe in the region and to invest in the region. We will remain the main donor in the region, and you know that we have opened a new program with Israel to integrate Israel better into European policies and programs for the first time, even if it's still modest. And why I am a bit optimistic, what's the factor of optimism, I will tell you. I've been here in the United States since 8 years, and I shall leave soon in September to go back to Europe. But since 6 years, we have made huge progresses towards reaching really a more common view between Europeans and Americans about what to do there. And thanks also to J Street, who has played a role in that. I think the level of understanding and of mutual support between European Union and the United States is higher than it had ever been. It's a small thing, but it is a point which makes me believe that if we really find the good solutions, we shall implement them.
I'll try to not to disappoint. A first note about Egypt and Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. I was present in Egypt during the elections the last year. And, you know, the one comparison that came to my mind is the comparison with Russia, surprisingly. Because in Russia we had the revolution of 1905, and it didn't succeed. And then we had 1917. Okay, the outcome was not great. So it's, I hope the Egyptians will, you know, when they'll get there, will choose another path. But it doesn't mean that something that started very on an optimistic note, on a good note, on a pure note, it failed this time. It doesn't mean that it will not succeed next time. And I think next time is about to come. About the outcomes of the Arab Spring and some optimism. First of all, I'm very happy that in this audience are two very wonderful people over there, Nimrod Goren and Gabi Mitchell of the Mitvim Institute for Foreign Policy. And before I turned an MK, I used to be also a fellow in this institute. And 2 years ago, we published a paper, and it was called Opportunity in Change. And right now I have some more things to add to this balance. Of course, we were speaking about opportunities and challenge in regard to Israel. So a few brief things that I can counter till now. The first one, I spoke about it. The Camp David Accords, it survived. I think it's a big accomplishment. Accomplishment of our Egyptian partners and of the dynamics of the region itself. Second of all, in regards to Israel, it's the chemical weapon of Syria. I no longer have the gas mask at my house that I used to have since I live in Israel. The camps was taken out, and I think the majority of it, I cannot say that, you know, I'm sure that it's the 100%, of course not, but a lot of bad stuff were taken out from this country. So I think it's definitely on the positive note. The Arab Peace Initiative survived, despite everything that is going on. If anything, I think it gained more momentum right now from the regional actors than before. Now it's our call, whether we want to proceed on this or not. And I can tell you that from the personal experience, you know, being in Tunisia and both in Egypt when everything erupted, I can tell you that despite the failures on the way, the people who participated in this historical events, they are still hopeful and they are still optimistic. They do still believe that they can make a difference. And you know, in the fact they made a difference. So we will not forget it. And I have to everyone, all the players, we have to build on this momentum to move forward and not to move back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.